ونديم همت في غرته وشربت الراح من راحته كلما استيقظ من سكرته جذب الزق إليه واتكى وسقاني 4 في 40 أيها الساقي إليك المشتكى قد دعوناك وإن لم تسمعي غصن بان مال من حيث استوى مات من يحيه من فرط الجوى خفيق الأحشاء موهون القوى كلما فكر في البين بكى ويحه يبكي لمن لم يقع أيها الساقي إليك المشتكى قد دعوناك وإن لم تسمعي ما لعيني عشيت بالنظر أنكرت بعدك ضوء القمر وإذا ما شئت فاسمع خبري عشيت عيني من طول البكاء وبكى بعضي على بعض معي أيها الساقي إليك المشتكى قد دعوناك وإن لم تسمعي ليس لي صبر ولا لي جلد ما لقومي عدلوا واجتهدوا أنكروا شكواي مما أجدوا مثل حالي حقه أن تشتكى كمد اليأس وذل الطبع أيها الساقي إليك المشتكى قد دعوناك وإن لم تسمعي كبد حر ودمع يكف يعرف الذنب ولا يعترف أيها المعرض عما أصف قد نما حبك عندي وزكى لا تقل إني في حبك مدعي שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך.
Okay, let's see if we can get this going here. Okay, so here we are. Welcome to the World Alliance of Qara'im afternoon Torah study. This is Parshat Tzav, and I am Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. I welcome you to this study. And as I always say, I really like to make it interactive. So if you have any questions, any comments, please go right ahead and ask. The best thing to do really would be to come up onto the StreamYard links, and then you can actually be part of the study. If you don't want to show your face on camera, you could just stop the camera and just use your voice or whatever. So here we go. If not, you can follow along on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter actually too. Okay, so here we go. We are in Parshat Tzav. Let me share the screen, and I'm sorry for the delay, by the way. That's why things were taking a bit longer, because there was a problem with the screen sharing, which should be resolved now. Let's see if it is. And there we go. Yes, it is. So we're going to share the screen. So we were in Leviticus 6, and we were exploring the burnt offering. We had spoken about the word mokda. Okay, so we have in. By the way, the numbering here. I use this website Bible Hub. Excellent site. If you ever want online Tanakh stuff, it also has New Testament, but that's not of my concern. So we were speaking about this word moked. So we have it here in verse 9. Again, I think the numbering is different in other versions, okay? This might be verse 2. Something is off in Leviticus 6. I guess it's different, the ways that different printings break up. Let me see. Actually, no, I'll just leave it. So you might have to follow along under different verses. I think it's just for chapter 6, and then chapter 7 it should even itself out. Okay, so Tzavet Aharon wa'et bana lemor zot tavrat ha'ola hi ha'ola al mukda al mizbeach kol halayla ad haboker wa'esh hamizbeach tukad bo. So we had this word moked. We saw that moked is a hearth, a burning fire. Basically, we examined a number of other instances where we see the word moked, or sometimes it's ked, or sometimes it's yakad, tukad. In fact, we have it right here, right? Okay, the fire of the altar will tukad, esh tukad will be kindled upon it, or will be burning upon it. Okay, so when you see the word mokad or tukad, yakad is the underlying root, yud kuf dalid, that refers to like a hearth, a burning fire. Okay, a pyre. Not a funeral pyre, but a pyre, I guess, if that is the correct word, right? Let's define pyre. Heap of combustible material, especially one for burning a corpse, as part of a funeral ceremony. So it's not that, but a heap of combustible material. So I guess it's not exactly the same as a hearth, but close enough. Okay, so that is the idea. So we have here this idea that the olah, well, we're calling it a fully burnt offering, right? Remember, here it is. Right, I didn't put it down because it's called that in other places as well. So because that's where they get the word Holocaust from, right? We saw that last week, that olah, in which the sacrifice is placed onto the altar and then basically fully burnt up, except for the blood, which is poured at the base of the altar, is translated into the Septuagint as Holocaust, which means hollow, completely, like holistic, and cost means fire, or burnt, like caustic, right? And of course, Holocaust, that's where they get the word Holocaust from, referring to the Shoah. At any rate, we saw that these olah offerings, these holocausts, or these fully burnt offerings, are all of the entire parts of the animal are placed onto the moked, okay, onto the fire, and none is given to the Kohanim, okay? They don't get a portion, it's all completely burnt up on the altar, okay? Well, here we're learning about how it's supposed to be burning all night long, okay? So, ala mizbeach kol halayla ad haboker wa'esh hamizbeach tukad bo. So, from what I'm understanding here is that well, we're going to see it more explicitly in the next verses, the fire on the altar is never supposed to go out, okay? The fire on the altar is never supposed to go out. It's supposed to be burning perpetually, right? So, and that's a way, I guess, of honoring God, of honoring Yahweh. The fire is burning continuously, even throughout all the night. So why did they mention the night specifically? Because no one's going to be bringing sacrifices at 3:30 in the morning, right? So, but the Kohanim are supposed to keep on tossing animals onto the altar all night long, so that the fire doesn't go out. Okay. So, okay. So what happens in the morning? And by the way, Lila is these are very specific words. Lila is the period once total darkness occurs. That's Lila. So what the rabbis might call Tzit Kochavim, or the coming out of the stars, when you can start seeing stars in the sky, when the sky has reached its maximal darkness. That is the Lila. Okay. The Boker is when the sun peaks above the horizon. Okay, and we've spoken about these times before. However, in this case, Lila might be extension include also the Aravim. It might include by extension here the evenings, but it doesn't matter at this point. Probably does not, actually, for reasons I'm not going to get into right now. But basically, there's supposed to be a fire burning. There's supposed to be sacrifices tossed onto the altar all night long, so that God's flame never goes out. Right? It's honoring Him, or maybe it's a sign of His eternity, of His perpetuality. So we keep the fire going. Okay, let's look at some of the commentaries and see what they have to say about the issue. So we are in Leviticus 6. Let's blow that up a little bit. So in Leviticus 6. Okay, so here again, the numbering is different, right? So here it's Leviticus 6:1. For some reason on Bible Hub, I guess they're basing it on a different Hebrew text. Here it's Leviticus 6:8. Okay, so everything's off by 7 verses just for Leviticus 6. So let's see what we have here. And this is again the Robert Alter. This is the teaching. Leviticus repeatedly introduces a particular set of regulations with the phrase, "This is the teaching Torah." Right. So that we see here. Okay. Zot HaTorah. Okay, so Torah basically means a set of instructions. Okay, you can think of it as an instruction manual regarding a certain subject. Okay, that's why it's a vast misinterpretation. Actually, I forgot I can open new tabs now, so let me do that. That's why it's a vast misinterpretation when in Exodus 12:48. So it says here, well, actually 12:49. Torah ahad yeh la'ezrach u la'ger hagar b'tochachem. There shall be one Torah for the native born and for the ger, the convert, we'll call it, right? The sojourner who dwells among you. And certain people, including one very stupid but well-known Karaite who thinks he's a lot smarter than he is, constantly says that this means that this applies to the entire Torah, that it means that basically once a ger has brought the Passover offering, that now he's exactly the same as an Ezrach, and all the laws of the Torah in the extended sense of the Sefer Torah, the book of the Torah, apply to him as they do to the native born. Well, that may or may not be the case. I actually don't think it's the case, but we're not going to get into that right now. But the point is that here, Torah Ahad does not apply to the entire Torah. The word Torah here is applying to the laws of the Passover offering, okay? And the way we can see this is because it's introduced in verse 43, وَيَمَرْ Yahweh el Moshe وَأَهْرَون zot chokat pasach kol ben nechar lo yochal bo. So this is the chokat, these are the laws of the Passover offering, okay? We have other laws up above, okay? Or actually previously, but these are more laws for subsequent Passover offerings from year to year, okay? And so Chukat is basically the similar idea to Torah, the instructions, okay? And then it goes through and it gives a whole bunch of things. Kol ben nechar lo yochal bo, no foreigner is to eat of it. That's someone who completely has no connection with Israel whatsoever. Kol eved ish miknat kasev wel malta oto az yochal bo, a servant that is purchased a slave, basically. If he's circumcised, then he can eat of it. And a toshav and a sachir, these are kind of people who are temporary. Toshav, as I always say, is a green card holder, and a sachir is like a migrant worker, right? A seasonal worker. Okay, they cannot eat it because they're not permanent parts of Israel. However, the slave, the eved, is a permanent part of Israel. He's purchased by a household, and he stays in that household if he's a foreign slave, not an Israelite slave. Then he stays in that household basically for the rest of his life. Okay, because there's no for Hebrew slave, we know that they go out after the 7th year unless they do the ceremony where an awl is put through, where the ear is pierced against the doorpost of the house. However, with a non-Israelite slave, once he's purchased, he's part of that household for the rest of his life, and so actually are his descendants. Okay, they become part of the household, so that they're permanent. They're actually more permanent in Israel than are the toshav and the sachir, than are the green card holder, quote unquote. Okay. Anyway, it goes on with some other instructions regarding the Passover offering, and then it says Torah echad yeh le'ezrach u'leger gar b'tochechem. So there shall be one Torah, and Torah here does not mean the entire Torah. It means one set of instructions regarding the Passover offering. What are the set of instructions? You eat it, it's to be eaten in one house, and you don't take it out of the house until the morning, etc., etc. You don't break any bones, etc. Okay, so the word Torah here means one set of instructions. It's like an instruction manual for the Passover offering. So one instruction manual regarding the Passover offering. That's the meaning of the word Torah here, as it is in Leviticus 6. Shall be for the Ezrach and for the ger. So meaning the same rules apply to the Ezrach and the ger, because the ger can, once he's circumcised, he can so here we see the ger, if he circumcises himself and his household, he can bring the Passover offering. And what is it? One set of instructions applies to him as well to the Ezrach. In other words, the same things. It should be eaten inside the house. It should not be taken out of the house. You shouldn't break any bones of it in it, etc. So that's Exodus 12. Now, if we go back to Leviticus 6, we see that same idea for the use of the word Torah. Okay, Torah is a set of instructions, and that's specifically what Robert Alter is. Oh, here's Ariel and Ben. Wonderful. But will their internet be working? That is always the big question. Okay, hi Ariel and Ben. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I certainly cannot hear you. So, okay, so let's go on. So, what were we saying? In fact, let's get rid of that to have more screen for the actual text. Okay, so Torah, this is exactly what Robert Alter is saying here. Okay, that the word Torah is teaching, this being the first occurrence. Okay. This being the first occurrence he means in Leviticus. Teaching is, in fact, the primary meaning of Torah, and this translation preserves the sense throughout, though in these contexts, procedure, ritual, regulation, and similar terms used in sundry modern English versions are all justified. In any case, the reiteration of the term is a strong verbal symptom of how Leviticus differs formally from other biblical books. This is primarily a book of instructions, and one of its Hebrew names, Torah Kohanim, could aptly be translated as priestly instructions, for sure. Okay. It is a very burnt offering. Hi ha'olah. He's just emphasizing why it says ha'olah, hi ha'olah instead of olah. I'm not going to get into this right now. The literal, so flame. So now he's talking about the word moked right here. Okay, so tatolah hi ha'olah al mukdah. Okay, so this is the word mokdah. He's translating it as flame. We said hearth or fire. The literal sense is place of burning, though the translation hearth proposed by some modern scholars sounds altogether too domestic for a cultic setting. Okay, that's a good point. Stylistically, this entire passage about the burnt offering is dominated by terms related to burning, as if to focus the idea of a sacred fire that burns perpetually, coordinated with the sacrificial fire that entirely consumes the burnt offering. Okay. The word for burnt offering or Holocaust olah is not derived from root that means to burn, that's right, but rather from the verb to go up, which, however, is met to metonymically, which I forgot what that means, linked to burning by suggesting the idea that the whole sacrifice goes up in smoke, right? So I think metonymy means one part represents the whole or the whole represents a part. So basically, exactly, it's an olah because everything goes up in smoke. Okay, fire and blood are two substances that are the key to the sacrificial rites, but the present passage gives preeminence to the nexus between cult and fire, the element associated with God's fiery epiphany at Sinai and with his first appearance. Okay, well, skip that part. Okay, hence an altar with fire that should not go out. Okay, well, he had some stuff there, but okay, good enough. So let's try Ariel and Ben again. Welcome, Ariel and Ben. All righty. So we have this idea of the fire going all night long until the morning. Okay, let's look at some other commentaries on this. Again, what I've been doing is just grabbing some of these English commentaries on this Bible Hub site. I've never heard of most of these commentaries before, but some of them are actually pretty darn good, I have to say. So we want Leviticus 6. And we want Leviticus 6. What was it in this version? It's 6:8. 6:9. 6:9. Okay, let's get some commentary. Okay, Ellicott's commentary for English readers. Never heard of it before in my entire life, except for the past couple of weeks when we've been referring to it once in a while. But is the burnt offering because of the burning upon the altar better? It's a burnt offering. So, okay, that is the continued burnt offering with which the sacrifices here enumerated begin is to remain burning upon the altar from the evening until the morning. Okay. It shall be fed and kept up by it according to the practice which obtained it during the second temple. During the second temple, the fat pieces of the burnt offering began to be burned at midnight, thus feeding the fire till the break of day. Okay. Okay, let's see what else we got. The Vulgate, the Chaldaic, the Syriac, and the Arabic versions are to this purpose, for according to Kalmet, the priests watched all night and put the sacrifice upon the altar piece by piece, consuming it by a slow and gentle fire, so that the sacrifice was burning on the altar from the evening when the Jewish day began till the morning, and then succeeded the morning sacrifice, which was in like manner consumed gradually and kept burning till the time of the evening sacrifice, until there were other sacrifices to come after, and then it was consumed more quickly in order to make room for these extraordinary burnt offerings. Okay, so that gives us some good information there. It has already been observed, Leviticus 3:5, that when the sin offerings or peace offerings were offered, the fat of those parts of them that were appropriated to the altar were laid upon the daily sacrifice and consumed with it. Thus, there was not a moment, night or day, in which the sacrifice was not offered to God to make atonement for the sins of the people, or rather to represent the continual and extensively efficacious. Oh, forget this part. Here we go, the Jesus Christ stuff. That. At any rate, up until then, it was a very nice. It was a very nice. It was a very nice commentary. Okay, so what do we see here? So right, the sacrifice. So we have to kind of get an idea of what the sacrifices are, okay, or when they're being brought. Okay, so this is a nighttime sacrifice, okay, that continues going through the night, so that the fire doesn't go out. Here we go with Ariel and Ben again. Any luck this time? Another thumbs down. No luck. Their internet is always problematic, as is mine sometimes. Okay, hold on one second. I can hear you, but the camera is not working. That's Ariella and Ben. Okay. Alrighty. My camera is not working? Huh. I don't know. I have all the settings set here. It should be working. Can everybody see the screen? Can you see the text at least? I don't really care if you see me or not. There's somebody named Jacob. Let's find out who that is. Hello, Jacob.
Hello, how you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing good. Trying to stream it on my laptop, but
Hello, Jacob.
looks like it's a little
Okie dokie.
behind.
Yeah, I have some problems with my
Yeah.
internet here, so that might be the problem. Okay, at any rate, I'm going to put you on mute, and if you have something to say, just please let me know. Just text or something like that, and I'll unmute you. Okay. Welcome to the study. All right.
Sounds
So,
good. Thank you.
yep. Alrighty. So, where were we? Right. So, okay, verse 10. We're up to verse 10. We lavash hakohen mido bad umichnase bad yilbash al bisaro. Okay, so this is what happens in the morning after the sacrifice or after the fire has been kept all night long. We have a lot of ashes. What are we going to do with all these ashes? So, walavash hakohen mido. Okay, his garment in modern Hebrew, a mad or mido, his garment would be a uniform. That's the modern Hebrew word for mad or madim. Okay, so his linen garments, umichnase bad, and his linen undergarments, trousers. They translated here. Yilbash al bisaro. So he's not dressed up in all of his garments. It would seem, right? He doesn't have the avnet and the ketonet. So maybe just the undergarments. We'll look at some of the commentaries. Wahirim et adeshen. So he scoops up the ashes. Adeshen asher tochala ish et haola al hamizbeach wasamo etzel hamizbeach. So in the morning time, I think is the implication here that this Kohen, who's not dressed in his full garments, but just his undergarments, because you don't want to do this kind of dirty work when you're dressed in your good Kohanic garments. So, but the Torah wants to make it clear that he's, dressed appropriately, right? He's not naked or something like that, right? So he's in his undergarments, and undergarments doesn't just mean in his, his tidy whities and I don't know, a crown on his head or something like that. It's the undergarments that cover the entire body. Okay, so he's not walking around like one of the Chippendales or something like that. He's dressed appropriately, and he is taking the ashes off the mizbeach that have been burning all night long and placing them next to the mizbeach, placing them next to the altar. Okay, let's try this again. I don't know what's going on. Now we have Ariel and Ben, I believe, and now we have Jacob back. Welcome back, Jacob.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Okay, I went on the phone this time because we've got a plug-in disconnected on the computer for some reason. So anyway, I put this on so we can hear you. It's very tiny, but while he's trying to plug something in, we can hear you here. All right.
Okay. If there's a problem with the internet, one of the things you could do is turn off the turn off the video, and that'll obviously make your audio work better because you don't need. I mean, when I say the video, I mean the camera, right?
Right, I understand. For some reason on the computer, it doesn't work. When I turn off the camera, it turns off the sound as well. I don't know. There's something really weird going on with it.
Right. Okay. Well, welcome to the club. I have plenty of internet problems too here, and I don't know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay. All right. So we were. Do you guys have anything to add so far to the verses we've been talking about, or?
No, I was actually interested in that one Torah that you were talking about. That makes sense because in Proverbs it says to listen to the Torah of your mother, and it's certainly not talking about the 5 books of Moses there. So it makes it clear that that's talking about that teaching, not necessarily the whole Torah.
For sure, and it's unfortunate that some people use it as, shall we say, fodder for their own, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Their own little thing that they have going, in order to in my opinion, distort the meaning of the Torah. It might very well be that the ger has must follow exactly the same rules as the Ezra, but Leviticus
Well, I don't
12:49
think so.
is not saying so.
I don't think so, because there
Right,
are
I don't
other
either,
verses
actually.
that talk about giving a certain type of meat that the Jew was not allowed to eat to the ger. And I don't know if that's talking about the ger that
Yes,
that
that's
just
right.
lives among them or what. But clearly there is a distinct difference in some things.
Absolutely, and you can lend money. Another one is you can lend money to the ger on interest, but to an ezrach or to one of your own people, you cannot lend money. So one of the problems with the word ger is it can mean a lot of different things. The rabbis solve this problem by coming up with the idea of a ger toshav and a ger tzedek. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? So the ger tzedek is quote unquote a convert, and so they say that basically, once someone quote unquote converts, then there's no distinction whatsoever. And then there's another thing called the ger toshav, that's someone who hasn't converted but lives in lives among the people. And so the rabbis will say that when the Torah says that you can sell the nivelan treifa to a ger, that's what you're talking about, either the body that died or has been killed. I mean, the body of an animal that died on its own or was killed as prey, and also when you can lend to the ger as with interest, that it's speaking about this ger toshav, not a convert, but someone who has to be living among the people temporarily, right? So they kind of conflate ger and toshav, because there is a phrase in the Torah, ger v'toshav, which is used a number of times. Anyway, it's a long story, but I agree with you. I think that the ger, I always say that Israel has concentric circles. It works its way from the center out. So at the center of the nation would be the Kohanim, then let's say the Levites, then the Israelites, and then the Gerim. Or you can look at it a different way. You have the at the center would be the king, and then the heads of the tribes, the elders, the Israelites, and Gerim. Also, I forgot other, for instance, the Avadim, the servants or the slaves that have been purchased with money. But the Gerim are definitely part of the people of Israel, but they're on that outer concentric circle, and that's why they're always mentioned with, in my opinion, slightly different laws. So, for instance, even in Exodus chapter 20, when it's about the Ten Commandments, one of the reasons we have Shabbat, we're not allowed to work on Shabbat, is so that the ger doesn't work on Shabbat, right? So the ger has he doesn't have to keep, he doesn't have the same, all the laws of the Torah, that apply to Ezra don't necessarily apply to the ger, but on the other hand, the ger has special protections as well. He cannot be oppressed or taken advantage of, right? Just as the widow and the orphan, the ger is often lumped in together with the widow and the orphan. Orphan is basically protected class. Okay, so that being said, let's get back to. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think it's not fully clear. I think that like, for example, a convert goes through a lot of trouble joining Judaism, and so probably
Right.
the laws of what would you say, the laws of interest and that kind of thing, you're supposed to look out for them and help them. So I don't know if in that case the laws of interest probably would be to that person that's living among you, but not necessarily trying to live as a Jew.
Right.
But that's
It's
my
possible,
own opinion.
It's
That's
possible
that,
it's possible the rabbis are correct, and there are two different. That's referring to two types of gerim. But if so, it would be, the text would be very confusing, because it always uses the same word ger. Ger is, there's no really distinction. There's not another word to say someone who's converted versus someone who's just, living in the land of Israel temporarily. But I think if we go down that route right now, we'll never get out of it. So eventually we'll come to those verses, and we can speak about it, more in detail. But my opinion is, whenever it says ger, that's what it means. It means a someone who basically who basically it basically means a convert, quote unquote. That's what it means. Okay, and then you might say, well, oh, someone's going to try to I don't want to go down this route now because we'll just get lost for hours. But okay, so let's go on with Leviticus 6 here. So the Kohanim, the Kohen in the morning is going to take all of those ashes. The fire's been burning all night long. They've been chucking pieces of meat onto it, and it's been burning all night long. And now it's the morning time, and there's a whole ash pile. The ash pile needs to be cleaned out. Okay, so verse 11. Aharim v'chotzi et hadeshen el michutz lemachane el makom tahor. Okay, so now he takes off those clothes. So remember, he was wearing the michnas bad and the michnas bad and the mad bad midol bad. He's wearing these undergarments basically. So he removes them and puts on undergarments. And he takes the ashes outside of the camp, right, and to a pure place, to a a clean place. And I'm not sure exactly what that means. A clean place. What would be a defiled place? I'm not really sure. But at any rate, we can look into what some of the comments.
Where they go to the bathroom.
The ashes are carted away, it would seem, each morning. And outside of the camp, right? And Ariella and Ben, I'm gonna mute you guys, and if you have anything to say. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Melech, you said a clean place. They have to use bathroom outside of the camp, so you wouldn't want to dump it there.
True, but clean. But the word tahor, it's usually translated as how do they say it again in English? Usually pure and impure, right? So tameh is impure, tahor is pure. So it means a ritually clean place usually. Okay. I mean, not usually. Okay. That's what it means. It means a ritually clean place. So maybe you're right. Maybe it means not but we're not talking about just a dirty place, because anything outside the camp is going to be pretty dirty, especially when you're in the middle of the desert. By definition, it's dirt, right? But so a ritually pure, ritually clean place. I usually translate tahor not as pure. I don't like the translation. I translate it as clean, because that's really what it means. Ritual cleanliness is related to our basic sense of cleanliness, and I think that's something the rabbis miss. In fact, they say quite the opposite. They say it's like some kind of mystical thing, but I don't think it is. It means a place that is basically clean enough to be considered ritually clean. Okay, anyway, we'll take a look at some of the commentaries in a second. So, but Ben and Ariel, I'm just going to mute you because there's a lot of background noise there. And if you want to say something, just let me know. Just type something in, all right? All right? Okay. So there we go. And same with you, Jacob. Jacob, do you want to say anything? Do you have anything to add or any questions or any comments?
No. We can continue on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Alrighty. And if anybody disagrees with me, I don't pretend to be God, and I don't pretend to be a prophet. There's so many different ideas out there. I'm just trying my best in these studies to make some sense out of very complicated topics with the help of other ideas and other people's ideas, and I never pretend that what I say is necessarily correct. I hope it is in the right direction, but if you think I say something that's wrong, please let me know. I'm happy when that happens, because I'm here to humbly learn the Torah, and if I'm proven wrong about something or shown that I'm wrong about something, I'm thrilled, because it just means that it increases my understanding of the Torah. So please, Jacob and anyone else listening, don't think that my word is the word of God or the word of even a prophet. Okay, just the word of a person trying to understand the Torah as best as possible. Okay, so at any rate, so we'll look at some of the commentaries, what they think this means. Verse 12, this paragraph here, al hamizbeach tukad bo. So the fire that's on the altar, tukad bo, will be burnt upon it, or will basically continue to burn upon it. Okay. Lo tichbe, it should not go out. Ubi'er aleha hakohen etzim baboker. And the now here's something interesting I never realized before, but I'll talk about it in a second. Ubi'er aleha hakohen etzim baboker. So the Kohen wood each morning. Each morning, more wood is added to the mizbeach, to the altar. Okay, so basically, once a day, wood is added, and then that wood is supposed to suffice until the next morning. At least that's what this verse seems to imply. And the other thing that's going to keep everything burning are the sacrifices themselves. So at night, maybe the wood is dying down, or the Kohen is not going to put more wood on there. So he's using the meat to keep things going, right? He's using the barbecue. He's just doing a perpetual barbecue, basically. But let's look at this word ubi'er. This is exactly the same word as we see in in Exodus 35:3. Let's look at that for a second. So Exodus 35:3. Lo ti va'aru ish. Oops. Hello. Okay. So Exodus 35:3. Lo ti va'aru ish b'kol moshvatechem b'yom Shabbat. Right. Do not kindle a fire throughout all your habitations on the Shabbat day. So this is a very important verse for Karaites for reasons we've spoken about many times before, and anyone who even knows a little bit about Karaism, even they're not Karaite, knows how central this verse is, right? Because we Karaites, or the traditional Karaite interpretation of this verse is that all fire's out once the Shabbat comes in. But however, we can now see exactly the same word here, ubi'er. Okay, so this is bi'er. This is in the PL form in Exodus, and that's one of the verb forms for those who are not so familiar with Hebrew. That's one of the verb forms of Hebrew. There are 7 main verb forms. They're called binyanim, or structures. So this is what's called the PL structure, and it's the same thing here. Lo tiva'aru. Okay, this is also the PL form. So we can use this to understand this. So now let's take a look at Exodus 6:12. Okay, so it says, so the fire that's on the altar shall burn upon it. Lo tichbe, should not go out. And the Kohen shall kindle upon it wood each morning. Okay, but so let's think about this for a second. The Kohen already has a fire going, and now he's adding more wood to the fire that's already going, right? He's adding more wood to the fire that's already going. That's what's going on here. So what does that tell us for Exodus 35:3? Lo tivaru ish b'kol moshvatechem b'yom Shabbat. Do not kindle fire. So do not, if we understand this to mean do not add wood to an already going fire, so then this would mean do not add wood to an already going fire throughout all your habitations on the that may or may not be the case. We'd have to think about it a little bit more. Let me just read this one more time. Well, it could just mean, to burn, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean exactly to add to a fire. And here it might just mean to burn, lo tivaru ish, which I'd always interpreted to, I've traditionally understood this to mean, don't start a fire on the Shabbat, but you can keep one that has been going. Okay, we're gonna have to think about this a little bit more. All right. Anyway, let's move on a little bit. Yeah.
Melech, I was going over that very same thought this week as well, because here we are in the 8,600 feet high, and it gets very, very cold in here at night. And
Sure.
we start the fire Friday afternoon and leave it until it goes out. But the question is, people
Right.
in the far north, how do they stay warm on Shabbat if they don't have electricity? I mean,
And
it's
as I always
very
say, forget even the far north. If you go up to northern Israel, if you go up to northern Israel in the wintertime, even if you go to Jerusalem in the wintertime, sometimes, in rare cases, it can get down into the 20s Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah.
At night, even in
And
Jerusalem.
I have to
Oh, yeah.
believe that God is a God of mercy, and he understands that he doesn't want you to spend the whole day in bed covered up with 10 blankets so that you can pass through the day. It's like he wants the Sabbath to be a delight. And it seems to me that kindling a fire might be a little bit more close to the real meaning. I don't know. I know that's more rabbinic, but the when you have to actually live that way, it's like, wow, how do we do this?
Absolutely. And I always say, even before God is the God of mercy, he's the God of common sense. Because if he doesn't have common sense, then who does, right? I mean, so just common sense. You as you said, if you're living in a cold environment, and you don't have to be in Alaska to be in a cold environment, okay? If you're living if you're living near the top of Mount Hermon and it's January, that's almost like Alaska. I mean, it can get down into the teens, if not lower there, probably on some cold days, right? And very windy on top of it. So yeah, it's
you don't even have to be on
it's
Mount
not a viable
Hermon if you're just
explanation.
living in Sfat. Sfat itself, it gets down to freezing there sometimes.
Yep, and there's a lot of snow up there as well, up in the northern mountains there, around Mount Meron, etc. So yep, it definitely gets cold. But let's look at this again. So verse 12, so it should not go out. So this would mean basically, I guess I mean, it's clear here in the context that the Kohen just burns wood each morning upon the fire, right? So, but again, if we want to be exactly, I mean, we could say here that if be'er means that the Kohen is adding wood to an already existing fire, right? So this would imply that he's tossing wood on a fire that's already existing. We know it already exists because it's never allowed to go out. So that's what's prohibited on Shabbat in Exodus 35:3. Lo tivaru esh b'kol moshvatechem b'yom Shabbat. Does that mean that you're not even supposed to add wood to an already burning fire on the Shabbat? I don't know, because I've always thought of it differently. As I've said, my interpretation of this verse is don't do all of the milacha associated with keeping a fire going, or to making a fire, like starting the fire, gathering the wood, etc. But the comparison between this verse and this verse here, I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about it. I'm gonna have to consider that. That maybe technically speaking, it says lo tivaru esh b'chol moshvatechem b'yom Shabbat. I don't know, because everything in the Torah is context. So it's just because technically it might mean, don't burn a fire, don't kindle a fire. The context here is very different from the context here. So at any rate,
my other thought,
again,
my question was, does it have anything to do with, I mean, I've had it explained that what they did in the temple, they were in a different, like they were out of earth time, that they were, I mean, and this all sounds really hokey, but that what happened in the temple was completely separate from a regular home, and therefore the rules were different. But I don't see that anywhere in the Torah. I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think that what the rabbis usually mean by that is that even on the Shabbat, sacrifices were brought, and on the holidays, sacrifices were brought, and that's work. Fire is burnt, even on the Shabbat, whereas they say fire is not supposed to be burnt by the Israelites on the Shabbat. So in that sense, there are different rules that apply. But and yes, I've heard all the stuff about space and time and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember. I've heard so many different versions of it over the years. Inside the temple is different space and different time and all that hokey stuff, as he said. But it doesn't matter, because what we're doing here, I'm just trying to understand the meaning of the word tiva'aru in 35:3. So it's purely a grammatical analysis here, right? We're not saying that the rules for Israelites are different from the rules of the Kohanim here. We just came across this word bi'er, which happens to be exactly the same word in exactly the same verb form as Exodus 35:3, as lo tiva'aru. And we see here in Leviticus 6 that bi'er clearly means, tossing wood onto an already existing fire, right? That's clearly the context here, because the fire has been burning all night long, or it's continually burning. And then it says here in the morning that the Kohen basically kindles upon it wood every morning, right? Or adds more wood to it every morning, right? So all we're doing is trying to see if that use of the word bi'er, which is exactly the same word here, albeit here it's in the future tense, but it's in the command tense, actually. Okay, the future is command tense. If we can shed some light on the meaning of bi'er here, or we can use the meaning of bi'er here to shed some light on the meaning of bi'er in Exodus 35:3. So once again, if we were to understand this as tossing wood onto an already existing fire, then that's what's prohibited, and that's what's prohibited here in Exodus 35:3. Lo tiva'aru esh, right? Don't toss wood onto an already existing fire. Then if we want to be strict, if we want to say that the word tiva'aru means basically kindle a fire that already exists, because we know that's what it means in Leviticus 6, then that would imply that on the Shabbat we should not be kindling a fire that already exists. In other words, we shouldn't be tossing wood even onto a fire that's going out on Shabbat. However, on the other hand, we can again say that it's different context here. So the context here is different. And from the context here, we can't necessarily say that because the word is exactly the same, that it means exactly the same, because that's not really the way that the biblical Hebrew or the Torah work. Everything is very, very contextual. So whereas here it might mean toss wood onto an already existing fire, here it might mean do all the milacha associated with keeping that fire going, which would mean perhaps gathering the wood, starting the fire, etc. Because we know that what's prohibited really on the Shabbat everywhere else is only milacha. That's the only thing that's prohibited on the Shabbat. Nowhere else in the entire Tanakh do we ever hear the prophets or Moshe speaking about not kindling a fire on Shabbat, and it also doesn't pass the common sense test, as you, Ariella, said. So I don't know. It's just food for thought. It's food for thought, because it's exactly the same word, it's exactly the same verb in exactly the same verb form, the PL form here and here. So that's my point. But again, let's finish this paragraph, and maybe we'll go look at some of the commentaries and see if we can get some ideas from what they say. All right. At any rate, so then in the morning, the olah, the burnt, usually translated as burnt offering, but the fully burnt offering, the completely burnt offering, I like to call it, is placed upon it, or is arranged upon it. And he shall, talking about the Kohen, shall burn upon it the fats of the shlamim. The shlamim are the peace offerings. So with the peace offerings, only the fats are tossed on the fire. Okay, so I guess what it's saying is that in the morning more fire is added. More wood is added, so the fire can keep on going, and then the daily excuse me, the daily sacrifices are brought, meaning the Israelites are coming with their various sacrifices, and they're being put on the put on the altar, on the mizbeach. Verse 13, Ish tamid tukad ala mizbeach lo tichbeh. And again, it summarizes by emphasizing this point. Ish tamid, an eternal fire, tukad ala mizbeach, shall burn or shall be burnt on the altar. Lo tichbeh, should never go out. So the main point here is that even at night, even in the middle of the night, that fire must be kept going. In the morning, wood is added to make sure the fire is kept going, right? So we have enough wood and enough sacrifices being placed on all the time to make sure that fire doesn't go out. That's the main point of this paragraph, with the addition that the details that in the morning the ashes are taken out of the camp and more wood is added. So it's basically kind of the 24-hour cycle of how to keep that fire going. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can do one or two things. Oh, and then I mentioned, if I could just find it right now. One second here. Okay, yeah. Thick water response on that. So Second Maccabees 136. Second Maccabees 136. Let's check that out for 1 second. And you'll see the relevance in just a second. So this is Second Maccabees 1. How do we get the whole text? Second Maccabees 2. Second Maccabees 136. Let's expand this a little bit. Okay, so I'll just read the English. Well, obviously, this is not even it's not originally in Hebrew or Second Maccabees, is it? I can't remember. It's either Greek or Aramaic. Okay, so 36. What? Wait, where did we go? I lost my place. Second Maccabees 136. 1 to 135. 1 second here. Second Maccabees 136. I don't know why it does. I just want the whole chapter of Second Maccabees. All right, it doesn't matter. So let's go back here. And we'll start here. And we will look. So this is obviously in the time, or it's written after the Maccabees. This is Second Maccabees, so I think it was written about 50 years after the time of the Maccabees, if I remember correctly. So then the priests sang the hymns. After the materials of the sacrifice had been consumed, let's even go back a little bit. Right. Your people in home. Okay. And after the materials of the sacrifice had been consumed, Nehemiah ordered that the liquid that was left should be poured on large stones. When this was done, a flame blazed up. But when the light from the altar shone back, so this is now speaking back. Let's start here. So this is Second Maccabees 18. So on the 25th day of Kislev, we shall celebrate the purification of the temple. We thought it necessary to notify you in order that you also may celebrate the festival of booths and the festival of fire, given when Nehemiah, who built the temple and the altar, offered sacrifices. So there was something called the festival of fire, okay, given when Nehemiah, who built the temple, the second temple, and the altar offered sacrifices. And here we see, for when our ancestors were being led captive to Persia, the pious priests of that time took some of the fire of the altar and secretly hid it in the hollow of a dry cistern, where they took such precautions that the place was unknown to anyone. But after many years had passed, when it pleased God, Nehemiah, so this is about 70 years later, right? Nehemiah, having been commissioned by the king of Persia, sent the descendants of the priests who had hidden the fire to get it. And when they reported to us that they had not found fire, but only a thick liquid, he ordered them to dip it out and bring it. When the materials for the sacrifices were presented, Nehemiah ordered the priests to sprinkle the liquid on the wood and things laid upon it. When this had been done and some time had passed, and when the sun, which had been clouded over, shone out, a great fire blazed up, so that all marveled. And while the sacrifice was being consumed, the priests offered prayer. The priests and everyone, Jonathan led, and the rest responded as did Nehemiah. The prayer was to this effect, and then the prayer was rendered. Then the priests sang the hymns after the materials of the sacrifice had been consumed. Nehemiah ordered that the liquid that was left should be poured on large stones. When this was done, a flame blazed up, but when the light from the altar shone back, when this matter became known and was reported to the king of the Persians that in the Exodus had hidden the fire, the liquid had appeared when his associates had burned the materials of the sacrifice. The king investigated the matter and enclosed the place and made it sacred. And with those persons whom the king favored, he exchanged many excellent gifts. So what's the point here? The point is really here in verse 19, that at least according to 2nd Maccabees, that the idea of keeping the fire on the altar was so important, or perpetually burning always was so important, that when we were led captive to, well, Persia later was originally Babylonia, but when the Israelites were led captive to Persia, this is during the Babylonian exile, that some priests took fire off the altar and they basically put it in a pit where it could burn, right? So there's some kind of fuel in this pit. And the idea was they wanted to keep this fire burning, okay, because the temple was about to be destroyed, right? They saw that the temple was about to be destroyed, or maybe it had already been destroyed, or it was about to be destroyed. So they took the fire from the altar and they put it in this pit with fuel in there, or maybe there was already naturally fuel in there. In fact, they call it naphtha. We'll get to that in a second. And they wanted to keep the fire burning so that when they could rebuild the temple one day, they'd have this fire burning elsewhere. They can take from that fire, put it back on the altar, and therefore not violate this idea that the fire would be perpetually burning. Okay? So that's what's going on there. And then later on, I think it's later in this chapter, go to 2nd Maccabees 136, right? Nehemiah and his associates called this neftar, okay, which means purification, but by most people it's called naphtha, okay? So this liquid, right? So when they came back after the exile 70 years later, the fire was already out, okay? But what was there was a thick liquid, okay? Which they didn't know what to call it. So they called it neftar, which means purification, okay? But most people called it naphtha. And naphtha in modern Hebrew is related to the modern Hebrew word neft, which means oil, as in petroleum, right? So this thick liquid, some people say, was kind of a petroleum, that basically there had been like maybe a petroleum source down in this, right? It basically was like an oil well, right? That they'd found this oil well where they could put the fire. Maybe there's a drip of oil, right? I mean, it's a whole thing of oil and the whole thing would explode and that would be the end of it. But they put the fire when they went into exile, hoping that it would still be burning when they came back 70 years later. But there was no fire burning. When Nehemiah came back, he knew this secret place because the priests had told him. And all that was there is this liquid, naphtha, which a lot of people say is oil or petroleum or whatever raw. I'm not an expert on oil or petroleum, but maybe Ben is probably much more than I am. At any rate, some kind of petroleum product was there. It was basically like an oil well. And so when they came back, there was this thick liquid. And then when this liquid placed, right, think of it as placing gasoline back onto the altar, or this oil was placed back onto the altar, and the sun came out, that it caught fire by itself. And so in a certain sense, the eternal fire that was supposed to be burning on the altar, on the Mizbeach, was continued in this. Does that kind of make sense?
Melech?
It's really interesting. Yeah.
Melech? Yeah, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
I believe I read somewhere that there are pitch pits in Israel, and it's possible that that pitch pit is what was used, I think.
You mean like a tar pit?
Yeah, a tar pit. Yeah.
Right. Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
and that would make sense, because that would act like naphtha or petroleum, and it would burn until it went out, and it would reignite with the necessary heat.
Right. Yep. So that does make a lot of sense. And I think there are tar pits somewhere in Israel. Let's see, tar pits. Israel. I remember hearing about it. It's Israel. Are there tar pits near the Dead Sea? Before the destruction,
There was
Dead Sea Valley
where the 7 kings was it the 7 kings when they were at war? Where didn't some of them get thrown in the tar pits?
Or they stumbled
You're
in
right.
the tar pit.
That's right. Okay, so let's take a look at that for a second. That's Genesis 14 or so. 14. War with the Kings. So here we go. Here's the War with the Kings right here. I'll just put it over in the English just to make it go quick, and we can get back to the Hebrew when we need to. So, all right. They turned back, blah, blah, blah. King of Sodom, etc., etc. The 4 kings. Then they went away. Man escaped, reported that Avram, blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. This is Leviticus. This is Genesis 15. That's already the Brit Ben Bitorim. I don't. Do you remember where that is, Ben, offhand? Where it mentions the tar pits? So this is the 4 kings versus the 5 kings.
He's looking it up right now. So we'll get back to you.
Sounds good. Yeah, because that seems definitely relevant. And here we see, well, at least Rabbi Wikipedia says that before the destruction, the Dead Sea Valley was a valley full of natural tar pits, which was called the Valley of Sidim. That's what's mentioned there, right?
That's
King David was
what I've got.
from
Genesis 14:10.
Genesis 14:10. Okay.
Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country.
Right. Very good. Good call, Ben. So now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits or bitumen pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. Okay, so let's see here. Let's see what the Hebrew is on that. So it's 14. Was it 10? Oh, okay. So here, this is the valley of Siddim. Be'orot, pits and many pits. Hemar. So that's the word that's used here. Is Hemar. So Hemar is okay. Let's see. Hemar is usually, as far as I understand, clay. So bitumen or asphalt is bitumen the same as tar? I'm not enough of an expert on building materials to know that one. I think Hemar usually means clay. Hold on a second.
Bitumen is the same as tar. It is, or in English, it's used the same as. Anyway, maybe not in American English.
There is a word in modern Hebrew which is biton, which is usually the same as asphalt, and I assume that biton is basically a bastardization of bitumen. So at least in modern Hebrew, it means cement or asphalt, and hemar in modern Hebrew means like clay. So I don't know. Let's look a little bit more. Well, we have also in Genesis 11:3 the same word. Let's take a look at that for a second. Right. So here's the bricks. This is when they this is the building of the whatchamacall, the Tower of Babel. Let's see it here. So 11:3. Let's make bricks. nisrafa l'srefa, and we'll burn them in the fire with tahilahem halivena, and it will become bricks. La'aven hachemer haya lehem lahomer, and so this tar or bitumen or clay or whatever it is, it's the same word here. Hayalem lahomer. So homer, I guess, is the translating is mortar. Okay, so maybe so. I don't know if it's clay pits or tar pits, but yeah, it's translated in a bunch of the translations as a tar. So is tar, what is tar made out of exactly? It's petroleum product, or it's petroleum somehow,
Yes.
right? It's like
it's a
thick oil.
petroleum product.
Okay. Alrighty, we'd have to do a little bit more investigation, but at any rate, so let's leave that alone. But that was a very good call with the tar pits. So again, that was Genesis 10. I'm sorry, Genesis 14, 10. Right? Where was it? So many pits of bitumen or whatever it is. Okay, so let's try to unwind a little bit. So we know that there are tar pits in the valley of Sidim. So here it speaks about tar pits. So maybe that is the translation. Maybe it does actually mean tar pits and not clay pits. Let's go with tar pits. And then if we go back here, then this very well might have been one of the tar pits that the priests hid the fire in, or let the fire burn in secretly when they went to exile, and Nehemiah picked it up and put it on the altar, and then when the sun hit it, then it burst into flames again. So kind of continuing this idea of the perpetual fire. At any rate, this is not mentioned anywhere in the book of Nehemiah. This is only mentioned in the book of Maccabees. It's not mentioned in Nehemiah or Ezra, as far as I remember. In fact, I'm not sure about it. Okay, so that's that. Okay. Any comments or any questions? Anyone?
I've got one quick one to just. Sorry, I keep coming back to this, but I just looked up very quickly, and it says here, asphalt bitumen occurs naturally in the region, so that the Romans called the Dead Sea the Asphalt Lake. Josephus, the famous first-century Jewish Roman historian, wrote, "In many places, the sea, the Dead Sea, sends up black lumps of asphalt. These, as they float, are in the shape and size like headless balls." And so, just another.
Yep. And Jacob adds, it comes from the root hamar, which means to boil, foam, daub, seal up, cover, ferment, or smear with asphalt. All right, so very possibly that's exactly what happened. Is that the priests hid this fire in one of the tar pits. So okay, let's wait. How do we get to that? Okay, we were speaking about this idea that this fire should never go out. Okay. Alrighty. Should we look at, see if there's any interesting commentaries here? Yeah, I read this morning. There wasn't anything. I'll read this one again. Flame. So this is the word moked. This is over here. So again, the numbering is a little bit off for some strange reason. I don't know why in this version. So this is, in some versions, this may be Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1, but here it's chapter 9, verse 8. And Robert Alter says about that word moked, the literal sense is place of burning, though the translation hearth, proposed by some modern scholars, sounds altogether too domestic for cultic setting. Stylistically, this entire passage about the burnt offering is dominated by terms related to burning, as if to focus the idea of a sacred fire that burns perpetually, coordinated with the sacrificial fire that entirely consumes the burnt offering. The word for burnt offering or holocaust, olah, is not derived from a root that means to burn, but rather from the verb to go up, right? Olah means to go up, which means everything goes up in smoke, which however is metonomically linked to burning by suggesting the idea that the whole sacrifice goes up in smoke. Okay, that this morning, so I'll linger on that. Okay, so that's this paragraph here. Okay, so this is the all night long. About that particular paragraph, or should we move on to the grain offering? Excuse me for just 1 second. I'll be right back. Buffy, what are you doing? Come here, dude. Come here. Okay, sorry about that. You've got a couple of cats and they make trouble sometimes. Okay, so the grain offering. All right, so first of all, we should point out that and by the way, and where is it? Okay, we'll get to it. All right, we should point out that the grain offering was, we already spoke about the grain offering in Leviticus, I think it's chapter 2. So here we have a whole bunch of laws for the grain offering, and basically, right, so there's olive oil that's to be poured on it, different types of grain offerings that can be brought, no yeast, that has to be matzot, and basically the different types of things that can be brought, right? So now we're going to find out different information about the grain offering. So let's see what the Torah has to say here. Okay, so verse 14, this is Leviticus chapter 6, verse 14, or in other versions, and again, this problem all solves itself, I think, by the time Leviticus 7 rolls around, but I guess they're different, based on the different Hebrew texts, or different ways of cutting off the chapter and verse. It's numbered differently. So let's see here. It may be, yeah, or Leviticus, or verse 7. So here I have it as verse 14, but it also may be verse 7. So you may have to subtract 7 from whatever verse I say here in general for Leviticus 6. Okay. Wazot Torah Hamincha, and here we have again Torah Hamincha, right? The instructions, the instruction manual for the grain offerings, right? Torah here means instruction manual for a specific topic, right? You can think of it as a little instruction manual dealing with a particular topic, okay? Akrevota b'nei Aharon lifnei Yahweh el pnei hamizbeach. Akrevota b'nei Aharon lifnei Yahweh el pnei hamizbeach. That the sons of Aaron bring it to Yehovah before the face of the altar. In other words, they take the grain offering and they bring it up to the altar. And what do they do at that point? So they take out of it a komets, a handful, okay? Misolet mincha, from the flour of the grain offering, umishmana, and from its oil, because it's brought also with olive oil. Wa'et kol halivona asher ala mincha, and all of the frankincense that is upon the grain offering. Okay, so what are they doing? So the Kohanim are taking a handful. Okay, and by the way, I think we looked it up last week, but is it 2 handfuls, or one? So closed hand or fist. So 1 handful. So they grab a handful of the grain from the offering, and they also take some of the oil that has been brought, okay, and all of the frankincense, okay, because what are they going to do with a bunch of frankincense, right? And that all gets thrown onto the altar. And so that becomes a sweet smelling scent, okay, and it's an azkarata le Yahweh, okay. It's a a remembrance to Yahweh. In other words, that little piece of, or that little bit of the, well, most of the grain is going to go to the Kohanim, as we'll see in a second. But this is the remembrance, the portion of it that is God. We can put it that way. Okay. And azkarata, and azkara is a memorial or a remembrance. Azkarata is its female or her memorial or remembrance, and the her that's referring to is the mincha. Okay, a mincha is a female noun, feminine noun. So azkarata means the memorial portion. I think you should translate it as the memorial portion of the mincha. In other words, it's a little bit that goes to God. That's you could say that's the way that God is remembered, or the way that perhaps alternatively the way that this grain offering is remembered, by giving a little bit of it is given to God, so that God is remembered. I think that's really the meaning of azkarata. So what happens to the rest of it? And this was already mentioned in Leviticus 2. Let's just open up Leviticus 2 in case we need to refer back to it. So I'll just leave it in the English in case we need to skim it quickly. Right, so let's find that here. So it's Leviticus 2:2. The priest shall take a handful of the flour and the oil, and oil together with all the incense, and burn this as a memorial portion on the altar, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons. It is the most holy part of the food offerings presented to the Lord. So it's basically the same mitzvah once again, right? It's just being reiterated. And I always say that in the Torah, when something is reiterated, it means it's important, right? Not that some mitzvot are unimportant. Some are, I guess, in a certain sense, more important or more crucial than other ones. And I guess the idea here that the memorial portion of the grain offering is given to God is very important, because maybe you could say, well, the fats, of the offerings which are given to God, who really needs a bunch of animal fat, right? But this grain really is useful. So it's important, I guess, to point out that even though all of the grain could be used by Aharon and his sons, with maybe the possible exception of the frankincense, that still a handful has to be taken and put and given as a memorial, given so that God is remembered, right? Can't. So we have that in Leviticus 2. We basically have almost the same thing here in Leviticus 6. Okay. Verse 16, وَحَنُتَرَتْ مِمَنَا يُخَالْ أَهْرَونُ بَنَاv, and that which is left over, right, after the handful is thrown onto the altar, is for Aaron and his sons. Matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh. So it shall be eaten as unleavened bread, right? We saw in, I believe it was Leviticus 2, that only unleavened bread is supposed to be eaten, right? Every grain offering, here it is, Leviticus 2:11. Every grain offering you bring to the Lord must be made without yeast, for you're not to burn any yeast or honey in a food offering presented to the Lord. Okay, so anything that ends up, a portion of it going onto the altar should be matzot, should be unleavened bread. Okay, and we spoke about this last week. It's very interesting, but we won't get back into it again. Okay, so right. So whatever is left can be bread, kadosh, and it's to be eaten in a holy place. What does that mean? So in the courtyard around the tent of meeting. So let's look again. Tabernacle. Be 100% clear what we're talking about. Okay, that's a good picture. I like that one. Good enough. So this here is the Ohel Moed, the thing in the center. Oh, this is the one in Timna Park. It's the one I've actually been to. So this is the let's see if we can grab it over here. Better picture. Blow it up. In Israel, they said, never say blow it up. Always say enlarge it. You don't say blow it up. Okay. So there it is. So, okay. So we can see here, this is the altar. That's the Mizbeach. Okay. This over here is the Ohel Moed. That's the tent of meeting. So this portion of the grain offering, so one handful, is thrown on the altar. And the rest must be eaten by the Kohanim in this area, within this enclosure, right? This is the Chatzer of the Ohel Moed. This is the courtyard around the tent of meeting. Okay? So that's what we're talking about there. Alrighty. The Chatzer Ohel Moed, right? In the courtyard around the tent of meeting, that's where it has to be eaten. Okay? Look, Hametz. It should not be baked into leavened bread. So that's reiterated. Okay, again, reiteration, in my opinion, usually is trying to show importance, right? So it's very important, right? It should never be, none of the sacrifices that are brought, or the grain sacrifices that are brought and put on the altar, should ever be hametz. Okay, does this have anything to do with Hagamatzot, with the fact that we have to, for 7 days, eat only unleavened bread? I don't know, not explicitly, but I guess one could make that case. If not, one would have to figure out, why does God not want leavened bread thrown on his altar? I don't know if I have an answer for that right now, but maybe someone does.
Yeah, we've always questioned that. What is that? What does that mean? And what does it actually mean, that the leaven? What is wrong with the leaven? What does it represent? Is it something filthy? Is it something defiled? It can't go on the altar, so it obviously is something common. I'm interested in what you might find on that. And also, what was the deal with the honey? What is wrong with honey? Where do we see that?
Okay. So I spoke about my opinion regarding, so the first question I honestly do not have an answer to. I can only tell you some of the rabbinical answers that I remember learning in yeshiva, which are nonsense in my opinion, but the typical answer that I remember learning in yeshiva is that hametz represents being blown up, like full of ego, or alternatively, like too concerned with material things. Matzot is also called lechem oni, the bread of affliction, or bread of poverty, although that's in relation to the Passover story. I think Jacob wants to say something. Jacob, did you want to say something? Because you're muted. So
Oh, no.
Jacob, if you want to say something, you got to let me know, because I have you muted. Go ahead. Now you're on.
Oh, no. Please, continue.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Oops, there goes Ariella and Ben. I will wait a minute for them to come back. And this is a good time just to take a break for a second, because I have to go grab my charging cable. So let's wait for them to come back, and we'll continue the study in just about a couple minutes. Okay.
Anyway, I don't hear anything.
Yeah. All right. You guys are back, huh?
Yeah.
Something happened and we went away, but we're back.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm just plugging in my charger for 1 second. Yeah. All right. So to get back to what we were saying, I honestly don't have an answer for why chametz is not allowed on the altar. I'm trying to remember this, something we'd have to go. Let me just do one thing here. Okay, let's do this. Let's see what Robert Alter has to say, just to start off as a starting point.
Mhm. Just my elbows getting
Okay.
tired, so I'm putting it over here.
Whatever that is.
No, I want to read it. Robert Alter. I want to see what it helps me to watch it as well as read it. He's got to go in.
Just then become holy. We'll get to that. So he doesn't say anything. The son shall eat. It's holy of holies. Yeah. So it doesn't. I think say something about it. He does say something about it in Leviticus 2. Let me see if I can find what he says in Leviticus 2. It's also mentioned there. So it's mentioned in Leviticus 2:11. Okay, where are we? That's 4. It's 3 to 11. So he's speaking. Okay, no really convincing explanation for this prohibition has been offered, although it might seem that there's some sort of connection between the ban on leaven in the sacrifice and the ban on leaven in the Passover laws. Honey here as elsewhere, the probable references to date honey does not appear to belong to the same category. Okay, so basically he says we don't know. Okay, why? And I don't have any explanation either. However, regarding the honey, and that's now in Leviticus 2:11. I do have what I believe is an explanation, and well, we'd have to look at it in the Hebrew for a second. And I spoke about this last week. So 2:11. כל מנחה אשר תקריבו ליהוה לא תעשה חמץ, כי כל שאור וכל דבש לא תקטירו ממנו אישה ליהוה. Okay? So any grain offering which you shall bring, you plural, meaning the people of Israel, the children of Israel should bring to Yahweh, lo te'aseh chametz, shall not be chametz of leavened bread, okay? And then it says, because kol seor v'kol dvash lo taktiru mimenu ishe leYahweh, because all seor is usually translated as, well, let's see how they translate it here. Leaven. Okay, so I usually translate it as leavening agent because that's what it is. Sourdough starter. In fact, the word sour, you could trace the etymology right back through the Latin and the Greek. The word sour is related to the Hebrew word saor. That's not some kind of speculative etymology. That's pretty much official etymology. So the whole davash, I think some of the etymologies give some baloney about Proto-Indo-European root or whatever, but you could trace it right back. Okay, so or means dough, okay, because sourdough starter specifically. I usually translate as leavening agent because it's the concentrated leavening agent that's used to make the bread rise. V'chol dvash lo taktiru. Okay, so we have here a grammatical structure in the sentence lo te'aseh chametz. Okay, it should not be made out of chametz, or it should not be made of leavened bread, because, and usually when you have ki and then something else, this is a clarification or an elucidation of what comes before. So the seor and the davash, in my opinion, are elucidations of the chametz. Okay, we know seor certainly has to do with chametz, right? Leavening agent certainly has to do with leavened bread, right? The concentrated leavening agent, or the sourdough starter, if you want to call it that, certainly is related to the chametz. But I think dvash is also related to the chametz because, as anyone who makes bread knows, you need to, well, there are two reasons you would add, which would be basically a sugar, a sweetening agent. And the first reason would be to feed the seor, to feed the yeast. It's not only yeast, actually, yeast bacteria, I think even some fungus. to feed the leavening agent. Okay, by feeding it sugars, it increases it activates them, or then increases their activation. And also the davash, the sweetening, the honey would also add a little bit of sweetness to the bread, right? So anyone who makes bread knows that you're always adding, or you're usually going to be adding some kind of sweetening agent to the dough, whether it's sugar, not a lot, but you're going to add some. You're going to add sugar, or you're going to add honey, or well, those are really the two main ones. It's usually sugar, although I like to add honey, and it helps feed the saor, it helps feed the yeast, and in addition, it gives it a little bit of a sweeter taste, because sourdough bread is called sour bread for a reason. It's very sour. Okay, if it doesn't have some kind of sweetening agent in there, it's almost unpleasant. So I think that the saor and the davash, the leavening agent and the honey, are two of the components of the chametz. So it's really not saying anything new here. It's basically saying chametz. It's saying don't bring chametz as a sacrifice, and then clarifies it, okay, or just adds to it, or shall we say clarifies it by speaking about two of the main components of leavened bread, which would be the leavening agent and the honey. So I don't think it means honey per se. There's no such thing as a honey offering, okay? There's a libation offering where wine is brought, okay? There's meat offerings, there's grain offerings, but we don't see anywhere anything like a honey offering. So really, it's just this way of breaking down the chametz and saying, that what's in it is the saor and the davash. That part of this leavened bread is the leavening agent and the honey. So let's see if I can give an analogy in English. I don't know. Don't bring. I'll just make one up off the top of my head. I don't know if it's going to work. Don't bring computers into the bathroom, because in the bathroom there shouldn't be any chips or hard drives. Okay, maybe that's kind of an analogy, right? It's the whole computer, right? And the chips and the hard drives are just examples of components of the computer, right? It's just kind of clarifying, right? Or maybe you could say that the real problem is the chips will get wet or the hard drives will get wet, but there are other components that would also get wet if you brought a computer into the bathtub, let's say, not the bathroom, right? So it's kind of the same thing here. The real prohibition is don't bring leavened bread, in my opinion. Again, the real prohibition is don't bring leavened bread, okay? And if you bring leavened bread, you're going to end up bringing saor and davash. Okay, you're going to end up bringing leavening agent and honey, because that's what makes up the bread, right? So it's another way of saying, it's another way of emphasizing this idea of don't bring bread, right? It's repetition. The Torah often uses repetition for emphasis. We also have the same thing when it comes to, at any rate, that's my explanation. I don't know what you think about that, Ariella.
I'm a bread maker too, and I do use sourdough. We've done sourdough a lot. But I don't like it with any sweetening in it. I like it just plain. Of course, if you pour off the sourness of it, it comes out a lot better. You got to drain off the water that raises to the top occasionally so that it'll be sweeter. But what the honey and sugar in regular bread, and I know you know this, but it makes the yeast rise faster. And it's like it's an additive that makes the yeast more active. I don't know if that has anything to do with this, is that the honey would actually make the yeast more yeasty.
And so with the saor, and so with the leavening agent, right? Without honey and without leavening agent, you're going to have matzah. That's exactly the point, that these are components of typical components of the way bread would be made.
So anything that would make the bread rise is something that isn't something that's wanted in this offering.
Yeah, that's possibly one way to think of it. Or an alternative way would be that what's not wanted is the risen bread, and then the leavening agent and honey are just being mentioned as components of that risen bread, but it's just another way of saying risen bread, right? Because no one's going to bring.
I've heard people comment, and I don't have an opinion on this, but that the Israelites got their sourdough or their starter from the Egyptians, that was an Egyptian
Right.
science or something at that time. I don't know though, was there anything wrong with science?
I heard that too, that the Egyptians were the first real bread makers,
Mhm.
or they were known for being, they were known for making bread. But then again, if that's the case, so I guess what you're implying is that leavened bread wouldn't be brought because it represents Egypt, and Egypt is, is is equated with people who are not following, with bad people, basically.
I don't know.
I'm not.
I'm just
I'm
asking.
not sure.
I don't have a
Yeah,
concrete opinion on this. It's just that something I've
yeah,
heard, and I'm not saying it's
yeah.
not true, but I'm not saying it is true. It's just I'd like to run it by
Right.
you.
I don't think it has. My opinion is I don't think it has anything to. My personal opinion is I don't think it has to do with that, because we know the reason that the Israelites didn't eat bread in the Exodus, right, when they exited from Egypt, and that was because they didn't have time to let the dough rise. Otherwise, they
Mhm.
would have. I guess you can say, well, God is working behind the scenes, and He wants a distinction between Egyptian bread and matzah. But I mean, bread is never looked down upon anywhere else in the Torah. In fact, quite the opposite, right?
No,
It's
no.
considered the staple of life. So there's no
In,
negative
in fact,
implications of
for
bread anywhere in the Torah.
for Shavuot, the 2 loaves were supposed to be leavened.
Absolutely, yep. On Shavuot, the 2 loaves are leavened. That's correct. That's right. That's right. We can look for a second at, I believe it's Exodus 13. Let's see here. No, it's not 13. So then, oh wait, one second here. 1 second. Okay. So here we have in Exodus 13:7. So this is referring to matzot with regards to the Passover holiday, right? So matzot yechel et shivat yamim. So matzot should be eaten for 7 days, or shall we say only matzot. If you're going to eat bread, it should be matzot. If you're going to eat form of bread, it should be matzot. So matzot should be eaten for 7 days. V'lo yireh lecha chametz, v'lo yireh lecha saor b'chol gvulecha. And leavened bread should not be seen, and saor and leavening agent and starter dough should not be seen throughout all your generations. So here again we have chametz is mentioned, right? Leavened bread, and also the starter dough is mentioned. Here there's no mention of dvash, of honey, but it also breaks it down, right? So either this is saying one and the other, or again, it's using emphasis. And that's what I think. I think that it's the repetition really means emphasis, and really the saor is meant to be a repetition of the, when the Torah wants to emphasize, it uses repetition. So chametz lo yer elacha chametz v'lo yer elacha saor. Although you could say here that because of the v, it's not a repetition, that it's actually this and this. But at any rate, here's again the component part. The component part, the saor, is also what is not supposed to be seen for 7 days throughout all of your borders on Chag HaMatzot, on Passover, right? So I get the interesting part again is that it doesn't just say honey, it breaks it down and mentions saor, although it never mentions dvash, it never mentions honey. And we see this in a number of other places as well, where it says chametz, then it'll also say, actually sometimes it says machmetzet, right? I can't remember all the verses offhand, I'd have to go look it up. But basically it breaks it down as well. It doesn't usually say chametz alone. It says also saor, or sometimes it'll say machmetzet. Maybe I should find that for 1 second. Nah, it's not worth it. We're just going to get too deep into it. But the idea is clear that often when the Torah mentions chametz, it speaks about either synonyms of the chametz or component parts of the chametz. So I think that's a form of emphasis. I think trying to show just how important it is that this leavened bread should not be either eaten on the Passover or brought on the altar. That's my opinion. And that there's no other explanation or there's no other reason behind it. There's not something. Well, I think Ariella, what you said might very well be the case that that's the essence that makes the bread rise. But at the end of the day, no one's going to bring sourdough starter, right? I'm not going to bring a chunk of yeast to God. It's really another way of saying leavened bread. For whatever reason, God does not want leavened bread put on his altar. That's the
another
essence
direction.
Here. Just as on
is there something about this sacrifice that Jehovah wants the pure grain without any adulteration, whether it be honey or leavening? Is there something represented by this grain offering that he wants just pure without any effect? I don't know. That just came to mind. But then later, when you use it for Shavuot, it's something that has been changed into something else. So obviously, the grain that's just ground and you put water on it and you bake it, that is pretty simple. That's just a simple, the simple truth or the simple whatever it is that this sacrifice is supposed to be accomplishing.
Right. Maybe, perhaps. Then again, Then again, the sacrifice that's brought for Shavuot is not thrown on the altar, right? And we saw in Leviticus that it can be leavened if it's brought as a first fruit offering, which is exactly what the Shavuot offering is, right? It's a first fruit of the in fact, it's called the first fruit offering of the wheat harvest. So that can be chametz. But if it's thrown on the altar, for some reason, it's not supposed to be chametz. It must be unleavened. It must be unleavened. And anyway,
very good.
Yeah.
Good discussion, anyway.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So, again, Robert Alter says there's no convincing explanation. So, I'm sure if we look through some of the other commentaries, they'll give all kinds of explanations, but who knows what it is. We can look just for the heck of it. Let's see. Let's look at one or two. So, commentary. So, Leviticus 6. So, this is Leviticus 6. Where is it? Oh, I'm sorry. It's Leviticus 2. Leviticus 2:11, right? It's 2. I think it was 11. Yeah. All right. So let's see. Ellicott commentary for English readers. Never heard of it, but now we'll hear what it has to say. Some general rules respecting meat offerings is honey was used in olden times to produce fermentation. There we go. It is excluded like fermented dough from these offerings. Okay. That's kind of what we're saying. No leaven, namely in that which is offered of free will. For in other offerings it might be used. Leviticus 7:13, Leviticus 23:7. What's Leviticus 7:13? Let's look at that for a second. Okay, so we'll get to that. That's next week's. Oh no, that's next week's parsha. Actually, this was forbidden partly to remind them of their deliverance out of Egypt. So here, this comment is relating it to the matzot of the Passover holiday, which is, it's not explicit, but it's possible when they were forced through hay to bring away their meal or dough, which was the matter of this oblation leaven, partly to signify what. Oh, here we go, the Christ stuff. Whoops, forget that. Okay. Either first with the same effect of leaven. Okay, well, let's go here. Nor any honey. So here's the explanation for honey. Either first, because it hath the same effect with leaven in paste or dough, making it sour and swelling, right? So it's a kind of leavening agent. Or second, in opposition to the sacrifices of the Gentiles, in which honey was most frequent. Or third, to teach us that God's worship is not to be governed by men's fancies and appetites, by God's will. Okay, that's kind of say that about any of the commandments. So there are two explanations. Again, the leavening explanation, or the fact that honey is added to the dough to help the dough rise. And second explanation, that the Gentiles added honey to their sacrifices, but that's kind of always a far-fetched. The Gentiles also brought, they also brought meat sacrifices, so maybe we shouldn't have meat sacrifices either at all. Okay, here we got some Jesus stuff, so we'll skip that. As for the obligation of first fruits, rather than oblation of first fruits. Okay. Honey being used to produce fermentation and leaven or a small piece of fermented dough were excluded because fermentation was an apt symbol of the working corruption in the human heart. Well, that's what I used to hear in the Shiva, right? That it represents like a swollen heart, like an uncircumcised heart. Well, that's pushing it a little bit, right? In the warm climates of the East, leavened bread spoils soon or soon spoils, and hence it was regarded as the emblem of hypocrisy or corruption. Some, however, think that the prohibition was that leaven and honey were used in idolatrous rites of the heathen. On and on and on. We're getting the same explanations again and again. Okay, so all right. I think we get the idea. Alrighty. So that's that. Let's move on to the grain offering. Oh, we're in the grain offering. What am I saying? Right. So I think we're here. Verse 16. Ariel, there's a lot of background noise again, so I'm just going to mute. Okay. And if you want to say something, just let me know, or maybe you can unmute yourself. I'm not sure. Okay. I'm just going to mute it.
Go for it.
All right. So, hanoteret mimena yochlu aharon. So the leftover after this handful is thrown onto the altar. So here we were. Matzot te'achel b'makom kodesh b'chatzer ol moed yochluhu. So we already said that. Verse 17. Lo te'afeh chametz. It should not be baked into leavened bread. Chelkam natati otah. So chelkam, meaning their portion, meaning the Levites, the Kohanim's portion, the portion of the Kohen. Natati otah me ishai, my fire offerings. Okay. So fire offerings is just a general term referring to anything, any offering, a part of which is thrown onto the altar, onto the fire. Kodesh Kodeshim, who it is holy of holies. Kechatat u ke'asham. It's a holy of holies. So this grain offering is very holy, holy of holies, most holy, as is the sin offering and the guilt offering, right? So we spoke about the sin offering and the guilt offering earlier. Kol zachar b'vnei Aaron yochlenu, and any male from among the children of Aaron can eat it. Chok olam ledorotechem. So since it has to be eaten within the courtyard of the tent of meeting, well, would that imply that women were not allowed in the courtyard of the tent of meeting? I'm not sure. Well, we know that. Wait a second. Hannah brought Shmuel. Well, it doesn't say she brought him explicitly into the courtyard of the tent of meeting. All right, we'll just let that one be for now. Yochlena chok olam ledorotechem. So this is an eternal statute throughout your generations. Me'ishet Yahweh, kol asher yiga bahem yikdash. And now we get to what you wanted to speak about, Ariella. So I'm sure you have something to say, so I'll preemptively unmute because I'm sure you're going to want to unmute. Okay, so there are two ways to interpret. So first of all, what does it say? Anything that touches them, meaning the grain sacrifices. One second. So anything that touches this grain sacrifice becomes sanctified. So I guess the question is, so there are two ways to interpret it, and I read your blog post, Ariella. So one way to interpret it would be that only someone who is holy, meaning a purified a Kohen, is allowed to touch it.
Mm-hmm.
Another way to interpret this, and I think this is the correct way, would be anything. It's not speaking about human beings. It's speaking about anything that touches it also becomes sanctified. And that's my understanding. We can go through some of the commentaries and see what the different opinions are. But I think what this is saying is, so let's say you have a grain offering, okay, that you've brought to the temple, and it's been dedicated to God, right? You've given it to the Kohanim, and they've taken their handful, thrown it on the fire. Now the rest is, I don't know, sitting around and in a pile, right? In a pile of grain, let's say, or in a pile of matzot, whatever the case may be. And you're a Kohen, or maybe just even a regular Israelite. You come along and you're eating a chicken sandwich, and your chicken sandwich falls onto the pile of grain that has already been sanctified to God. So now your chicken sandwich becomes a holy chicken sandwich. Your chicken sandwich is now sanctified to God. It touched the grain offering, so now it is sanctified. And that's what I think it means. I don't think it's referring to human beings. I think it's referring to any other object that touches these holy grain offerings itself now becomes dedicated to God. In other words, the holiness kind of is contagious, just as we see, and I think one of the commentaries, I think I read it this morning, but we'll read it again. I think it's Robert Alter who mentions, Jacob Milgram points out that so holiness spreads just as unholiness, just as tuma, as impurity can spread. So if something is impure and then something touches it, it becomes impure. So it's the same thing here. If something is sanctified and then an object touches it, it becomes sanctified as well. Once that portion has already been thrown on the altar, or maybe even once it's been declared as sanctified to Yahweh. I'm not sure, but at some point, anything that touches that holy grain offering, right? It's Kodesh Kodashim. It's Holy of Holies. And so anything that touches it becomes holy. And I think actually where it says Kodesh Kodashim, wherever it says Holy of Holies, anything that touches something that is declared Holy of Holies becomes itself holy. Maybe. We'll have to look for this phrase. But that's my understanding of it. So, Ariella, do you have anything you want to say or add or subtract?
Except that, like in Haggai, the first verse I used in that blog post, it says that he asked the priests. He's trying to show a spiritual. I mean, obviously the priesthood is in contamination at the time, but he's asking him. He says, if that which you carry in a holy thing touches something impure, will that impure thing become holy? And he says, no. And it's like, is it possible that these are things that are already even in a neutral state in the temple that would touch it? They're not contaminated. They're not defiled. They're just things that are. Because, I mean, listening to your comment, you wonder, if the prophet rebuked them because of thinking that they could pass their holiness on to things because the thing had gone through some kind of symbolic ceremony. I mean, in what I'm contemplating is that in all the pagan religions, you use things like holy water to sanctify things. You use things like, holy, you eat this piece of bread and it inflates you and you become part and parcel of a sinless being and all this thing, this Catholicism. We can't say the same thing happens in Judaism. It just isn't. So is it possible that, what is it talking about? There must be a misunderstanding here somewhere. And like you say, it probably isn't people. It's probably having to do with things, but are these things in a neutral state that have never been contaminated? They're things like that chicken sandwich, which works because it wasn't something that had been defiled by something, there are rules about defilement throughout the Tanakh and throughout the Torah. And so anything that would be in the temple wouldn't be in a state of defilement anyway, would it?
Right. Correct. Yeah.
So I don't know about
I
this
think
transfer. It may be that thing now had to be considered holy, and it couldn't be used for any other purpose now.
right.
I don't
Well,
know. It's
let's
a
look at what it's.
very deep thought.
I hear what you're saying. Well, let's look exactly at what Haggai says. So this is Haggai 2:10.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll just do the English for now, and we'll refer to the Hebrew if we need to. So on the 24th day
Right.
of the 9th month of the year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. This is what the Lord Almighty says: ask the priests what the law says. If someone carries consecrated meat in the fold of their garment, and that fold touches some bread or stew, some wine, olive oil, or other food, does it become consecrated? The priests answered, no. So I think what's going on here. So first of all, this implies that we're talking about things becoming consecrated. First of all, not people,
Mhm.
right? So
Right.
this refers back to Leviticus 6:18 here. Then that backs up the idea that we're talking about other things becoming consecrated and not people. So you would think here the priest would answer yes, based on Leviticus on 6, right? Because here it seems to say that yes, it would become consecrated. The difference here is that it doesn't say that the separation here of the fold of the clothes, right? The clothes are touching, not the actual sanctified thing itself. And I think that's why, my opinion is that's why the priest answered no. Because if it had just been the consecrated meat itself touches it, then the answer would be yes, I think, because that's based on, see something here. That's what I think. So let's just see. 1 second. So then Haggai asks about the spreading of tu'umah, of impurity, and then Haggai says yes. Then Haggai says, so it is with this people and this nation in my sight, declares that the Lord, whatever they do and whatever they offer there is defiled. So I think what he's trying to, so first of all, he's the underlying idea here is, so what is Haggai saying? Haggai is saying that the impurity spreads faster, or has more spreading ability than does the holiness, right? And so it is the same. So the analogy, so the analogy is being used for the people of Israel, and other they're impure, and they're spreading their impure. Anything they touch is becoming impure, right?
Right, and that would go along with what I said, that it couldn't be something that's defiled, because if it touched something that was defiled, the defilement would pass over to the consecrated thing. So the consecrated, which, like you were saying here, that the defiled thing seems to spread worse than the consecrated thing.
Right.
Like contagious.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Contagious. So if it was in the temple anyway, they could not take anything into the temple that had been defiled.
Yes, but something could become defiled in the temple. Like, let's say an animal dies, right? Then it's
that's
defiled.
true. But there were processes for cleansing afterwards.
True. I mean, it's an interesting question. What would happen if a holy thing touches an unholy thing? But the point I think you're trying to make is that it's a neutral thing touching a holy thing, and it becomes holy. So I agree with you.
I would say that's about the only solution I see here. Even though, I mean, it's like, if we take it out of the context, take it out of the temple into society, and we apply it to people, then you go with this, you get into paganism. So it's a real, it's a very fine issue that, I don't know, it just struck me because it seemed to be saying the opposite of some of the other things that are in the Torah. And even in chapter 7, where it says that if this meat touches something, it's contaminated. I guess we haven't gotten there yet, but basically, it's something, just an enigma, which I came across this week. I thought, how do we define this? How do we apply this? And so anyway, I'm open to any comments, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, but specifically, what is the potential contradiction, or what is the enigma that you find that basically what would happen if I'm sorry, you better state it, Ariella, because I'm still not sure exactly what the big contradiction or what the big problem you have is here with
Well,
these.
the problem, I mean, you pointed out the fold of the garment. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that saying that that fold is actually prohibiting the passing of this transference of holiness?
Right.
But to me, it seems that items cannot make other items holy unless they've gone through the same process. Maybe, since it's just about items, maybe it doesn't matter. But the whole deal of transfer of holiness, and there's a few things that are said. I found that commentary by Rashbaum, that said it definitely isn't a transfer of holiness. So anyway, I'd need to do some more study on it, because it seems to me that there's perhaps only in my mind a contradiction there. But can we sanctify something else through something that's holy?
I think the answer is yes, but again, I'm not. Maybe I'm missing the point. But what's the contradiction? Why would you think we wouldn't be able to because of what it says here with Haggai?
Yeah, partly that, and also the Ezekiel, where he's saying that the job of the priest is to teach the people the difference between the common and the profane. I mean, the profane and the holy, and to not mix up the two. And that may also have something to do with this whole thing of not mixing leaven with this pure sacrifice or this clean sacrifice. Whatever, this sacrifice probably boils down to the fact that it's the sacrifice and what the sacrifice was given for, the grain offering and the sin offering. They both were down to their purest and simplest form for some reason. And if you don't contaminate, I mean, it may have a parallel there. I don't know. I'm just saying something that you don't want to.
All right.
You don't want to mix things. Mixing things doesn't work in the sacrificial system.
Okay. All right. I hear what you're saying. Let's take a look. First of all, let's do this. Let's look at Robert Alter on Haggai chapter 2. Let's see what he has to say about that. Just for the heck of it. So go back up here. Oops. Exodus, Leviticus, oh boy. Find it. Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, 2 Kings, Isaiah, that's a big one. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai. There we go, finally. Chapter 2, verse 10. Okay. So, here, verse 11. So it doesn't say anything. Okay, so it doesn't say anything, I don't think, regarding our particular issue. Okay, so that was worth checking. Now let's look maybe at some of the other commentaries. So let's look at Haggai. Let's look at some of the commentaries here on Haggai 2:10. Actually, it's 2:11. It's 2:11. It's actually 2:12. Okay. All right. So the flesh of the sacrifice hallowed the person who touched it. So here it says hallowed the person, but whatever. But this sanctification was not conveyed to anything he might afterwards touch. On the other hand, he who was defiled by such a pollution as a contact with a dead body conveyed defilement even to the tabernacle. Even so, according to Haggai, the guilt of the impurity incurred by the Jews in neglecting the temple had tainted the labor of their hands and caused famine, and what merit they might claim for restoring the... Okay, skip that. That goes on to something else. 1 second. Some of these two rules of the law is the sin more easily learned from others than holiness. Yeah, we know that, but we want to get an idea. Let's see. Okay. The flesh of the sacrifice hallowed whatever it should touch, but not further. But the human being who was defiled by touching the dead body defiled all he might touch. Okay. 1 second. So I think what this commentary is saying, is that the sacrifice is touching the garment. So the garment becomes holy, but the garment cannot pass the holiness on now to the other thing.
Okay.
Right? The bread or the stew or the olive oil. So that the holiness can only be passed once.
Okay, interesting.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, not that the coat is serving as an intermediary, but that the holiness can only be passed on once. So what he's saying is that if object A is impure and it touches object B, then object B not only becomes impure, but also has the ability to impart impurity to object C. But that doesn't work with holiness. If object A is holy and it touches object B, then object B becomes holy, but it does not have the ability to now impart holiness to object C. So that's
right.
basically what this.
Okay. But also, this is talking about a priest. This is talking about a priest's garment, which is already declared holy, right? Weren't those garments already consecrated? Is the priest carrying the flesh in his garment that's already holy?
I don't think it's speaking about a priest. I think it's speaking about meat that someone basically said, I'm bringing this to the temple to dedicate to God. So it's speaking about a regular Israelite.
Okay. Right. It doesn't say priest there. It's anyone.
Right.
Okay, very good.
I think that might be the issue, that the unholiness or the impurity can pass on basically like a disease. It can go from one to the next to the next to the next. But the holiness can only be passed on to the object it touches directly. Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting it. I think that makes sense, because then you couldn't take an item from the temple and go out into the world and touch everything with it and make it all holy. It doesn't work that way.
Well, you could take an item from the temple and then start touching it and make everything that you touch it with holy, but those objects, if they touch another object, wouldn't make those other objects holy. In other words, it only works once. It doesn't work twice.
Yeah.
Whereas impurity works endlessly. Impurity is more like a disease. It spreads.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Let's see here. Okay. Let's see if someone says something else. Gil's exposition of the entire Bible. 1 second. So here it says, if one which was sanctified or separated for holy use, part of which belonged to the priests who might carry it in their pockets to the proper place of eating it. So here it does imply, this commentary thinks that the priests are carrying it in their pockets, and with his skirt do touch bread or pottage or wine or oil or any meat, which were not holy and not separated for holy use, but were common meats and drinks. Now the question upon this is, shall it be holy? That is, if either of those common things were touched by the skirt, in the pockets of which the holy flesh were carried, whether they were made holy by such a touch, and no more and no more remained common or profane. And the priests answered and said, no, they were not sanctified, for though the garment itself was sanctified thereby and might not be employed in a common use till washed, Leviticus 6:27, yet a garment touched could not convey holiness to whatsoever that was touched or touched it. Right. So the garment, okay, so Leviticus 6:27, which we'll get to, right, speaks about the garment that is made holy. So I think, you know what? I think before we go back to Haggai, we have to read the rest of this chapter and see how it
I
affects
think
garments,
so.
because
Okay.
that's the main one of the main things here. Okay, so let's go on. But what is clear is, I think we both agree that it's speaking about objects becoming holy, not people becoming holy.
Right.
So
That's clear. That's pretty clear.
Yep. All righty. So let's see what we have here. Oops, I just looked at that. History. Alrighty, so we're up to verse 19. וידבר יחווה אל משה לאמור, זה קורבן אהרון ובניו, אשר יקריבו ליחווה ביום הימשך אותו. עשירית העיפה, סולת מנחה תמיד מחציתה בבוקר ומחציתה בערב. So this is now speaking that is to be brought on the day that that Aaron and his children are basically installed. Himashachoto. So that's on the day that they're installed, or they're anointed. Then they're supposed to bring a tenth of an ephah of fine flour in the morning. So tamid machatzita baboker or machatzita ba'erev. I guess it means after they're installed. Then they're supposed to bring a tenth of a solet of flour in the morning, and I'm sorry, tenth of a solet of flour, half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening. So this is the perpetual grain offering. So what this is saying is that once the priests are installed, then they are to bring a perpetual grain offering, which is going to be a tenth of an ephah of flour, half in the morning and half at night. Half in the morning when the sun rises, half in the evening once the sun sets. So we'll say at sunrise and at sunset. Al machvat is usually like translated censer or frying pan. Bashemen te'aseh, it should be made or cooked in oil. Murbechet, taviena. Tupine, mincha, pitim. So let's see here. Murbechet means mixed. So I guess what it's trying to say here is that the flour is mixed together with the oil and then baked into matzot. Okay. Tupeni mincha, pitim, takriv, reach, nichoch, le Yahweh. 1 second. Tufine. What am I getting here? Let me just look at this in the English for 1 second. So 621. 621. So it's the NIV. It must be prepared with oil on a griddle, bring it well mixed, and present the grain offering broken in pieces. Bring it as an aroma. Bring it well mixed, and present the grain offering broken in pieces. Okay. Let's see here. Where were we? Oops. Okay. المخبط בשמן תעשה מורבכת תביינה תופני מנחת. I don't know what this word is. Tufine. I'm not getting that one. All right. At any rate, we'll just go with the English translation there. It must be prepared with oil on a griddle, bring it well mixed, and present the grain offering broken in pieces. So it's there in the Hebrew. So that's pitim. Pitim is like is basically like pitim means, well, pat means bread, so pitim would mean pieces. Takriv reach nichoch, a sweet smelling scent to Yahweh. I'm interested to see how Robert Alter translates this. So this is 621 minus 7 is 14. is 6:14. Leviticus 6:14. See what we have here. 6:14. On the griddle shall bring it. It shall be done. Soaked through shall you bring it as a grain offering of baked pieces. Soaked through, you shall bring it as a grain offering of baked pieces. You shall bring it forward. All right. All right. I don't want to get bogged down, so we'll just move on to the next one. It's this word tufine. I'm not parsing that one in my head. All right. At any rate, verse 22. So the anointed Kohen that is in his place among his sons, meaning whoever replaces the Kohen in the future, so so in other words, this is supposed to go on throughout all of the generations, that this morning grain offering and this evening grain offering from a tenth of an ephah of fine flour, half in the morning, half in the night, is supposed to be brought throughout the generations. And Khalil Taktar, that it should be completely burnt. So this grain offering is completely thrown onto the altar. This morning and evening grain offering, none of it is given to the Kohanim. It's completely thrown on to the altar. Okay. V'chol minchat kohen khalil tiheh lo te'achel. And any grain offering brought by a kohen, khalil, completely on the altar, completely consumed, and lo te'achel, and should not be eaten. So I assume that's referring to any grain offering that a priest brings. That is when a priest presents a grain offering on his own behalf rather than on behalf of the lay person. No part is to be reserved for his consumption. All of it must be burned on the altar. Right. That's the way I would understand it as well. Okay, so when a person brings a grain offering, the priest throws a handful onto the altar and takes the rest for himself. But if the priest himself is going to bring a grain offering, he doesn't take a portion for himself, right? It wouldn't make any sense. It all gets thrown on the altar. That's what.
Melech, can I interrupt a minute?
Sure.
And I don't mean to take you out of the stream of where you're at, but I just found this statement by the Rashbam on Leviticus 6:11. The problem may be, in my understanding of the word holiness, or to become sanctified. He says that assuming that the substance or the person had been ritually pure prior to touching those parts of the sacrifice, it now becomes sanctified, i.e., out of bounds or forbidden. In other words, this item now is like in a different state. You can't use it for common things anymore.
Right. So yes, that's what sanctified means. It's dedicated to the temple.
Right.
Right.
Right. So it isn't like it's transferring, and I appreciated what you said about it being only transferable once, but now
right.
this thing is out of bounds for that person that had it if they touched it or whatever, if that item touched that other item. That's
Once
good.
Something becomes But I think could you read that explanation again, Ariella? The sentences you just read?
Yes, I wish I could copy it. I've got it on my computer screen and I would send it, but it says here, Rashbam, it's in Safaria, Rashbam on Leviticus 6:13, assuming that the substance or the person had been ritually pure prior to touching these parts of the sacrifice, it now becomes sanctified, out of bounds or forbidden.
Right. Right. Yep.
And it says to compare the comments on Exodus 29:37 and Leviticus 8:11-8, but I don't have those handy right now, so I can send you that later if you like.
Well, let's take a look for a second at Exodus. What was it? 29:37.
29 and well, parallel verses of Exodus 29 and 37, and well, I guess it doesn't have a colon, it has a comma, 29 comma 37,
Okay.
and Leviticus 11 and H.
All right, let's look at Exodus 29 just for the heck of it. So I'm not sure where they're talking about in Exodus 29, but let's see very quickly. Anointing oil, take a swing at the rest of the base of the altar. Take one of the rams, slaughter it, cut. Take the other ram, take the fat.
Okay, here you go. It is 29. It is that is the verse 29:37.
37. Okay.
There was a hot link there. It went right to it.
For 7 days, make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. Then the altar will be most holy, and which is it will be holy. So here we go again. This most holy in Hebrew is going to be Kodesh Kadoshim.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that anything that's declared Kadosh Kadoshim, the definition of that is that it can transfer holiness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That one time. So okay. Wait a second here. So it was 29:37.
Yeah.
Okay. Hidash Tova Haya Hamizbeach. Hold on a second. Bulky, the cat is on the table again. Good. We have cat problems. We have a cat infestation. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. She's looking right at me. Come here, you. Get out of here. Goodbye. All right. So here we go. That the Hayam is Be'ach Kodesh Kodeshim. The altar is holy of holies. So anything. So I think this is the story here. Anything that is declared holy of holies can make something else holy. But anything that's I put Suf outside. Okay. But anything that's holy cannot make anything else holy. So the holy of holy makes something holy, but that's it. That's as far as it goes.
Wow.
Right? Because we see that also in Leviticus, we see here that the grain offering is also declared holy of holies. We saw that in right here in 6:17, right?
Mm-hmm.
The grain offering is declared Kadoshim. So I think that's what it is. Anywhere we have the phrase Kodesh Kadoshim, holy of holies, it can transfer holiness. But then the thing that it transfers it to doesn't become holy of holies. It just becomes holy. So it can't transfer. It is holy, but it can't transfer holiness.
Okay, so it becomes holy, but it doesn't become holy of holies. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, if it said that it became holy of holies, then it could also transfer further. So let's just see if we look up this word Doshim.
That would be a giant chain reaction that turns everything holy.
Right, there would be a giant chain reaction that turns everything holy. But as we were saying before, with impurity, it is a giant chain reaction. It's like a disease; it spreads. Okay, so let's see. Kodesh. Let's see if we can find this phrase Kodesh Kodoshim. So here, Exodus 26:33. So Kodesh Kodeshim in this context, in Exodus 26:33, means the inner sanctum. It separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. So the Kodesh is the outer part of the Ohel Moed, of the tent of meeting. That's where the showbread and the menorah and the incense altar are. From the Holy of Holies, that's where the ark is. But so I don't think, even though that phrase is used here, I don't think that's what it doesn't mean in terms of transferring holiness. But it is interesting that if we go back to the tabernacle, we don't see it here. Okay, here we go. The area here is called holy, and this area here is called Holy of Holies. Right? So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, so that's Exodus 26:33. Uven Kodesh Kodeshim, so that's the same thing. Kodesh Kodeshim, that's all the same thing. So it's Kodesh, 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 Kodesh. We're just looking for this phrase of Kodesh Kodeshim specifically. Let's see here. No. Oh boy, 64 occurrences. Wait a second. I think if I do most holy. No, that's not what I'm looking for. I want the. Someone of concordance. All right, forget it. We'll go back to what I was going to do before. Okay.
Interesting, Melech,
All
that
right.
Ibn Ezra speaks of this. This may throw a wrench in the works. He says that if Leviticus 6:20 it doesn't say, it says that it says shall be holy. He says this is similar to whatsoever shall touch the flesh thereof shall be holy, Leviticus 6:20. Some say that the verse speaks only of the bread. Scripture is telling us that if the bread is not holy, that is, if the bread is unclean, then it shall not touch the altar, which is completely different from what some of the other commentaries say.
All right, let's take a look. So that's 6:20, you said?
Okay, this is Ibn Ezra's comment on let's see, what did he say? 6:20.
Okay, which actually might be 6:13 here.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
Nope. And maybe it's the other way. 6:20 is
Oh,
it
no.
6:27?
Oh my, get all confused here.
Gosh. So here I think you're talking about this one here. So this is referring to this is, I'm not sure which verse he's referring to because the numbering system is different again in this
Yeah,
chapter 6 here.
it is. It's very different.
Yeah.
Let's just skip over that one. I'm trying to find it, and it just.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was saying that nothing that isn't holy should even touch the altar.
Okay.
Referring to chapter 6, verse 20, which was talking about the things that touch the altar. So it's instead of like it says here in this English version of the Art Scroll, it says shall become holy. He's saying it says shall be holy, and I don't know. You know more about the Hebrew. Does it say shall become or shall be? I mean, because there could be a huge difference in that. There could be a huge difference because if it shall be, it means that you make sure it is before you put it in there. It doesn't that it becomes. That was kind of the whole basic question I had. Does the item become holy, or is it demanding that the item be holy in order to touch it? So that would throw a complete wrench in the works.
Which verse is it in Ibn Ezra? Which one? Because I have the Ibn Ezra open right now.
6:20, which is also the same in the Art Scroll. Whatever touches its flesh becomes holy, but you can look at the Hebrew. Does it say becomes holy or shall be holy? It's what
27.
What
so I think it's referring to this one here. Yeah. Okay, so here's the verse. It's this one here. It's listed as 27. So Kol Asher Yigabe Basara Yikdash. So I think so let's look here. דבר יהוה אל משה לאמור, דבר אל אהרון ואל בניו לאמור, זאת תורת החטאת במקום אשר תשחט העולה, תשחט החטאת לפני יהוה, קודש קודשים היא. So first of all, we see that the sin offering, the chatat, the sin offering is being called the Holy of Holies. In verse 20, well, in Mark 25, in his 25 minus 17 minus 7 in his 18. הכהן המחטא אותה יאכלנו במקום קדוש תאכל. So the Kohen that brings it as a sin offering shall eat it in the in the courtyard. כל אשר ייגע בבשרה יקדש. No, it's the same thing. I think it's exactly the same phrase as earlier. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy. So I believe that it's clearly speaking about anything that touches the flesh of the sin offering also acquires holiness because it is holy of holies. That's what it says one verse or two verses previous, right?
All right.
So let's see what Ibn Ezra says exactly. Kol asher yiga bebasar achat yeh kadosh l'Shem והכהן יאכלנו לכן חלק הזורק או חלק הזורק כחלק כל אחיו. I don't understand because the Ibn Ezra is saying exactly what we're saying. So here, even with the English translation, whatsoever shall touch the flesh of the sin offering will be holy unto God. In other words, will become holy unto God, and the Kohen shall eat it. So I guess you're thinking because it says be holy unto God, that he should be holy unto God. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I was drawing from it. But in fact, this translation of Ibn Ezra, which is in Sefaria, is saying that shall be holy. And he continues saying, some say that the verse speaks only of the bread. Scripture is telling us that if the bread is not holy, that is, if the bread is unclean, then it shall not touch the altar. So
where do you see that?
That was commentary on Leviticus 6:20 by Ibn Ezra.
I'm looking at it right now in Safari. I didn't see that.
Okay, I just clicked on it and it opened up into the 40 commentaries, 40 different commentaries, one by Ibn Ezra.
Okay.
But anyway, you know what? We can just leave this one and go on to something else.
All right.
It is very, very deep.
It's pretty clear.
Thank you for taking time on it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. So I think it's pretty clear that what we see here so far is the pattern that if something is declared holy of holies and it touches something, then whatever touches becomes holy, becomes sanctified. But that thing is now holy. So whatever it touches does not become sanctified because only something that's holy of holies can pass on sanctification. So it's like, what would be an example? Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I can't think of anything offhand. I always try to think of these analogies, and then I can never think of one. Anyway, I think that the point is clear that it's speaking about objects, and it's speaking about objects that are declared holy of holy, they pass on holiness. But then something that is touched by a holy of holy becomes not holy of holy, it becomes holy. And something that's holy cannot pass on. It stops after one transfer. And that's exactly what Haggai is saying.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. It's a new light on it. That's great.
Right. So the garment is holy because the holy meat touched the garment. But if the garment touches something else, that something else does not become holy because the garment is holy. It's not holy of holies.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, that's we've gone that far. That's good.
Yeah. So I think we have to always watch out for the phrase holy of holies, kodesh kadoshim. And when we see that, we know that it can impart holiness once and make something not holy of holies, but make something holy.
Right.
So, all right. So let's see what else we have here. Since we're already down at the bottom of Leviticus 6, we'll stick here. Mikdash v'asher yizeh midama al habeged asher yizeh aleha tirabes b'makom kodesh. So, okay. So anything, if blood from this sin offering is sprinkled on a garment, then that garment has to be washed in the holy place. So the blood so not only the meat, but also the blood makes something holy, or at least makes a garment holy. Okay, verse 28. So if this sin offering is cooked in a clay pot, in a clay vessel, then it has to be broken. So I guess it can only be used once, right? It's now considered too holy to be used for anything else or to be saved. It's broken. And if it's cooked in a bronze pot, morak with shutaf b'mayim, that should be scrubbed and washed in water. It has to be thoroughly cleaned. So, so again, this holy of holy things, if it's cooked in a clay pot, the clay pot is broken, which is very interesting because in Leviticus 11 we find out that an impure thing falls into a clay pot. I think it mentions a dead romes, a dead creepy crawly thing. Then the pot also has to be broken. So clay pots, whether they become pure, whether they become holy, or whether they become impure, have to be broken. We see that in Leviticus 11. They close off Haggai, by the way. So we're going to finish that. And and if it's made out of bronze, then it just has to be washed. Let's just take a look here. Let's get Robert Alter on that one. Okay. So this is what Robert there. It is also possible to construe the sentence as Baruch Levine does. Oh, we read this before. Okay, but I'll read it again. It's also possible. No, we've already closed that subject. Enough. Okay, successor among his sons, perpetual portion for the Lord. 16, which is our 23. So we have to go down more. And that's all he has to say. So 16, every priest's grain offering shall be entire. So we read that. Okay, so it doesn't say anything about this paragraph here. I don't think. It's the guilt offering. So that's the Asham. Okay, so then we get to chapter 7. Alrighty. We'll go a little bit longer. It's kind of getting late here, and then we'll stop. Oh, there go Ariel and Ben. Oh well. Maybe they'll be back soon. Okay. Wow. So that's interesting stuff. It really is. So we'll sum up Leviticus 6. Right. So we mentioned that. Well, okay. Oh, right. Robert Alter doesn't have anything to say about that. But we can look ourselves in Leviticus 11 for a second. And again, I'll just look at the English to make it go quickly. Excuse me. In Leviticus 11, where is it? Here we go. Okay, so here, I'm just going to read the English just to make it go a bit more quickly. Of the animals that move along the ground, these are the unclean, blah, blah, blah. Of all those that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean till the evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article, whatever its use, will be unclean, whether it is made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in water. It will be unclean till the evening, and then it will be clean. If one of them falls into a clay pot, so here we have again a clay pot. This is 1133. Let's switch over to the Hebrew. 1133. Do you know where Levi? Oh, here's Levi. Okay, cool. בכל כלי חרש אשר ייפול מהם אל תוכו, כל אשר בתוכו יטמע, ואותו תשברו. So we have here a creepy crawly thing, a sheretz. Atamei b'sheretz shoretz. So we have a shoretz or sheretz, a creepy crawly thing, which can include anything that crawls on the ground, whether it's mice, rats, or even bugs. So if it falls into a clay pot, so if a dead body from one of these romes falls into, look, it's really bothering me, okay? Because she's going to start jumping up on things. Please, sweetheart, get rid of her somewhere, all right? She can't. She's going to start jumping up on things and disturbing me. Put her in the garage if you need to, okay? Put her in the garage, okay? Or go sit with her outside for a little while, all right? All right, I got to do this. Okay? So anything that happened to be in that clay pot becomes impure, and the clay pot is broken. So here we have a clay pot that's broken when a defiled animal falls into it. Clay pot that's broken. Where was it again? Oops, we're in 6. Yeah. Here we have a clay pot that's broken. So kli cheresh, right? The same thing, clay pot or clay vessel. Kli cheresh, and here we have a kli cheresh. So if a holy thing is cooked in a clay pot, then the pot is broken. If if the carcass of an impure animal falls into a clay pot, then the clay pot is broken. So whether the clay pot acquires holiness or whether the clay pot acquires impurity, it's broken, right? It's and the reason for that is usually understood that it's porous. It kind of absorbs the impurity or the impurity because these are not necessarily clay pots that were put into a kiln. These are porous, right? Like a jug or something like that might be that's not put into a kiln. So it's just interesting that we see in both cases the clay pot is broken. Okay. Go a little bit more. And then we have if it's a clean nechoshet, if it's a bronze vessel. So what happens with a bronze vessel here? כל האוכל אשר יאכל אשר יבוא עליו מים יטמא, כל משקה אשר ישתה בכל כלי יטמא, כל אשר ייפול מנבלתם עליו יטמא, תנור וקיריים יטץ, טמאים הם וטמאים יהיו לכם. אך מעיין ובור מקווה מים יהיה טהור ונוגע בנבלתם יטמא. Okay, so I'm looking for something else here. One second. So maybe it doesn't mention explicitly here a non-clay pot. No, it doesn't. The implication is if it's not a clay pot, then it doesn't have to be broken. Okay. Alrighty. All right, let's move on to Leviticus 7. Now we have the guilt offering, but it's getting a little bit late. We've been going at it for about 3 hours, so maybe we should stop here. Go a little bit longer and then stop. We'll go another 10 minutes or so. All righty. Zot Torah ta'asham Kodesh Kodoshim hi. So again, the guilt offering is also referred to as Kodesh Kodoshim. That means, again, it can transfer holiness. So just like it says that regarding the sin offering, same with the guilt offering. Okay, where in the same place where the olah is slaughtered, which I think, again, is on the north side of the altar. So the guilt offering is slaughtered. Et damo yizrok ala mizbeach saviv. and its blood is thrown on the altar all around. ואת כל חלבו יקריב ממנו את העלייה, ואת החלב המכסה את הקרב, ואת שתי הכליות, ואת החלב אשר עליהם, אשר על הכסלים, ואת היותרת על הכבד, על הכליות, יסירנה, וקטיר אותם הכהן המזבחה, אישה ליהוה, אשם הוא. כל זכר וכהנים יאכלנה במקום קודש יאכל, קודש קדושים הוא, כחטאת כאשם. תורה אחד להם, הכהן אשר יכפר בו לא יהיה. והכהן המקריב את עולה איש אור העולה אשר יקריב לכהן לא יהיה. וכל מנחה אשר תאפה בתנור וכל נעשה במרחשת ועל מחבת לכהן המקריב אותה יהיה, וכל מנחה בלולה בשמן וחרבה לכל בני אהרון תהיה איש כאחיו. All right. I think we're going to stop here. There's obviously a lot more to study. Then we have the consecration of Moses and his son, of Aaron and Moses' congregation, consecration of Aaron and his sons. And it goes on. All right, but I think we're going to stop here. I think it's enough for today. We're going to end it here. So are there any questions or any comments? Jacob, anything you want to add or say?
No, I think it was a good study.
Thank you. I'm glad you came. Welcome anytime. Hope to see you again in future studies. And
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay. Anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question? All right. If that's the case, then I think we're going to end the study here. And I appreciate all of you for coming. Hope you have a great Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov, wherever you are in the world. And we will see you again soon. All right. Shabbat Shalom.